Hello, my name is Walter Wimberly, and I'm an assistant professor of computer science. Today, I'm answering questions that I sometimes get from students, especially in that freshman to sophomore range, and they go, will I be able to finish this degree? Now, this question usually arises after they just had a bad class or maybe even just a bad test, and they're starting to feel bad and starting to doubt, will they get this information? Will they learn it? So I want to give you a couple of pieces of information I think will be helpful for you regardless of what program you're in. So I want to give you a couple of pieces of information I think will help if you're in that similar type of situation, and not just as a student, but maybe as someone who's new into the field. One of the things I want to tell you is in college, and especially in the STEM fields, you can be a very bright student coming into it, and that does not mean that you will not have a difficult class that is hard for you to pass. It does not mean that you will not have a test that you are not going to fail. It does not mean that you're going to have a hard time understanding a concept. And none of those things mean that you're a bad student or that you won't be able to succeed. STEM fields especially are very difficult. It requires a different type of thinking than you find in a lot of other fields. It is no longer like you had in high school where you are repeating information back to a teacher that you had learned. You're having to look at a problem, evaluate it, and come up with a solution. It's a different type of thought process, and sometimes things are difficult and hard to come up with solutions. That is normal. So what differentiates between the two people who have a hard time in a class or have a hard time on just an assignment, and one quits and one doesn't? Well, the difference is what some people refer to as grit. The ability to fail, pick themselves back up, and press on. That is a very important thing to work with in any type of STEM field and in general in life. So let me give you a personal example. I myself, and I tell this to some of my students, and I tell this on some of these videos if you've watched others, I have taken some classes, especially the math classes when I was an undergraduate, and I had a difficult time with them. And I said, this was the hardest I've ever worked to earn a C. Now, that didn't mean I was a bad student. If you look at a lot of my other classes, hey, I was making A's and B's, no problem. Even in some of the other math classes. It was just some of them were difficult. So what would happen when I would do poorly on one of those tests in one of those classes? Well, I could say, you know what, this just wasn't me, I'm going to give up and quit. And some people did that. I had a class, for example, that was a difficult class in my undergraduate, in fact, in my very first semester in college. When that class started, we had approximately 35 students in that class. We only had room for about 32. There were several people who were literally standing against the back wall. By the end of the first week, we were down to 30. We had actually empty spare chairs. Only 7 people of the 35 that started that class finished and took the final. I was one of them. In fact, one of my fellow students that I had befriended during the class, I saw him that he had missed the final, and he had been up there through the rest of the class. And I said, what happened? Why weren't you taking the final? You okay? And he's like, oh no. He says, I dropped that class. He says, but I was going to learn everything I could because I'm going to have to retake it again next semester. So I attended every class to make sure I could get everything I could so that I'll pass it next time. And I think that's a perfect example of grit. Yeah, he had a problem. Yeah, he had to drop the class. But yes, he also continued on, and he did everything he could, staying in the class, learning, preparing, getting ready to do a second time. I myself, when I had a problem in that class, I went to the professor, and I would go over every question I missed on a test, every question I missed on the homework assignments. What am I missing? How do I fix this? What can I do? What can I think to do better next time? And this professor was great at that, luckily. And he helped me. I graduated that class with like a B, B minus. But it was a great thing that he was able to help me, and I was able to succeed in that class because I also didn't give up, and I spent a lot of time with that professor. In other classes, sometimes I go to a student tutoring center and get help. Sometimes I talk to a professor, form a study group, and several of us in class would get together and study. And sometimes in that study group, none of us would understand how to solve a particular problem. And the 4 or 5, 6 of us would all march into a professor's office and go, we're working on this and we're trying to study this and we don't get it. And the professor would sit there with all 4, 5, 6 of us and work through it. The thing was, we never quit. And that's what grit is. Grit is about not quitting. It's about approaching a problem. If you get knocked down, you approach it differently. You try again. I've met a lot of people in my life, not just in STEM fields. Something bad happens, they throw their hands up and they quit. Well, it just wasn't meant to be, they'll say. Or, oh, well, I'm just not smart enough. That's not the answer. A lot of times they are smart enough, and I knew it and I've told them as much. It was just, hey, bad things sometimes happen. So if you're in computer science or any STEM field or any field for that matter, maybe just in life, and you're going along and something bad happens, approach it, try to figure out why something bad happened, adjust and overcome and continue on. That's what life is about. That's what I tell my students if they have a bad time in a certain class. Keep working at it, keep trying. The more effort you put into it, the more likely you succeed. It reminds me finally of one final quote I want to tell you, because sometimes you'll see, well, that person was just lucky. They were able to do this. They're just super smart. They're able to really do this. What you don't see is the amount of work and effort they put into it. The quote that I like so much is, the harder I try, the luckier I get. And so sometimes what you're not seeing, all that effort, the practice, the studying, the rehearsals, the everything else they put into it, you don't see. They aren't smarter than you. They aren't luckier than you. They've just worked harder, and that's what you need to do as well. So if you have a bad class or a bad assignment, should you give up? No. The chance of success increases with the grit that you have, the ability to get back up after you're knocked down from a bad situation. There's a link I'm going to put in the description below that I think is very beneficial. It talks about grit. It talks about someone who studied that and studied success in a lot of different factors. They looked at military, business, education, and they can give you a lot more information about that. So if you want more information, check out that video listed below.